Welcome to a special episode of the PaynePoints Podcast. I'm your host, Sarah Harbuck, and joining me on this Zoom recording today is my co-host, Kristin Ellis.
Good morning, or good evening, sorry.
And our producer, Megan Harbuck.
Hello.
Our guests today are podcasting queens Shannon, Locke, and Angélica Davila. Did I say that right?
You sure did.
Thanks, ladies, for taking time today to talk to us. How are y'all?
We're great. Thank you so much for having us. Yes, doing fine. Happy to be here.
Good deal. Well, as you guys can see, we're doing things a little differently with this episode. Not only are we doing a video recording with our guests over Zoom because they're on the West Coast, but this episode isn't really interviewing a business owner per se, as we are going to be talking about how you can start your own podcast. Podcasting is such a big medium in which people can, share similar interests. And it's a great way for business owners to showcase their businesses in a completely different way. So we asked Shannon and Angélica to talk with us about how you start a podcast. So ladies, before we dive into those questions, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourselves to kick things off, and we'll start with Shannon.
Hi, I'm Shannon Locke. I am 32 years old and I live in Los Angeles, California. I currently work at Earwolf Podcasting Network as a audience growth specialist. That's my title. And I'm in a band called Townland. I'm the lead singer, and I love knitting, and I mostly love Kpop. And I have a podcast called Ask Me About Kpop, and that's why I'm here today.
Woman of many talents.
Well, Angélica, can you top that?
No, but I'm Angélica. I live here in Los Angeles as well. Shannon and I have been dear friends since we were teenagers. And I'm an educator here in LA, and found my love of K-pop through my dear friendship with Shannon. But I, to be honest, knew nothing about podcasting before starting this podcast ourselves. Shannon has worked in podcasts for quite a while, and it was her idea to start ours initially. So she is very much the brains behind our operation.
So she's the resident guru out of all of us, actually, it sounds like.
Yes, she's the real expert. I just tag along.
Good deal. Well, ladies, you mentioned Ask Me About K-pop as your podcast. So, when you guys were thinking about doing this, first of all, you have a background, Shannon, in podcasting. So is that what kind of prompted this? I like K-pop, so I'm going to start a podcast.
I think I really, really sincerely love podcasting. I think it is a wonderful medium. It's the most intimate of all entertainment, I think. And in my 9 years working at Earwolf, specifically working with fans, I have seen the very specific bond that people have with their podcast hosts and their podcasts, because unlike other activities where like you sit on the couch and watch a TV show, like people listen to podcasts on the bus or while they walk or while they do dishes. So podcast listeners start to associate memories like with the people that they listen to. And I think it's just so special. So I've always wanted to have a podcast. I never really knew what my podcast would be about though, until a Christmas party in 2017, a company Christmas party. I was talking to one of the hosts of a former podcast called How to Be Less Old, where the hosts talked to like young people and people about like trendy stuff so that they didn't get old and get behind. And she found out about my like love of K-pop, and she was asking me so many questions. And then she had Angélica and I on the show to try to explain K-pop in a like 45-minute episode. And we walked away from that feeling like we didn't say anything, but that was like the most fun we've ever had in our lives. So I started like pitching. I put together like a pitch doc of like a pilot and like a 10 episode, like Ask Me About K-pop. Here's what you need to know about K-pop. And I was going to pitch it to like my bosses at work as like as a legit work project or whatever. But then it just sort of took off from there, and we had way more to say than 10 episodes. And like, I don't know, now here we are almost 3 years later and 135 episodes plus deep.
Wow, that's
awesome.
Yeah. So Angélica, are you like the jelly to her peanut butter? Because I know I had to kind of talk Kristin into being my co-host. She was like, I don't know. What am I going to say? I don't know anything about anything. And I was just
I had never even listened to a podcast. Like, talk about how not to be old, I need to look that up. I didn't. She was like, do you want to do this? And I was like, I mean, I'll give it a shot, but do you want me to do this? Yeah.
Yeah, I had also like never listened to a single episode of any podcast. I like couldn't even, I think I could have named you like Serial was a podcast I think that I had heard of, and that was it. And so when Shannon asked me to do this, she didn't have to talk me into it. I was like, sure, whatever. And like, I have time and I love Kpop. So it was an easy sell, I think, mostly because we had always, before going on that first podcast or being the guests of that show, we always joked that all we ever wanted in our fandom lives or like our lives as fangirls was for people to ask us about Kpop because we just think it's so fun to talk about. So when somebody actually did like for a whole hour ask us about it, and then she brought up like, do you want to just like talk about it all the time? I was like, yeah, let's do it.
Yes.
It wasn't a hesitation.
I was about to say, I feel like Megan is totally on board with that thought.
Yes, I'm being called out, but yes, it's true.
I mean, if somebody gives you the opportunity to talk about the thing you love the most, you're going to take it.
Absolutely.
Exactly.
Well, and that brings up an interesting point. People are like, well, I don't know what to start a podcast about. What do you do? How do you do all this? And so we'll get into the technical aspects of it here in a bit, but what would you guys tell people if they were starting a podcast? Like, what advice would you give them in terms of what subject matter to cover?
I would definitely say that like passion should be part of it because podcasts are a lot of work. They're easy to start, but they're very hard to maintain. And I think that is what people find when they start a podcast on a whim is like, oh, wait, this actually is, I thought I could just like turn this mic on. So I think that you really need to know what you want to talk about and like know that it is a thing that you will want to keep talking about. Because that's the, hole that you're digging for yourself. And that's the work that you're going to have to put in. So I think I think one of the reasons, if I can toot my own horn a little bit, I think one of the reasons that people like our podcast is because we genuinely really love the things that we talk about. So I think that comes through and people appreciate that. So if you're doing a podcast about something that like bores you, nobody's going to have any fun and you won't either. Yeah. And if you're trying to make, that's like for podcasts that you want to maintain, right? That you want to have like a longevity with. But I would also say, if you wanted to do something, like if you had an interest in, research, telling a very specific story or telling like a closed, like you have like a set of 10 episodes or something, just have a plan. Like Shannon said, a lot of people think they can just like sit and turn the mic on and like, it'll just come to you. But it, like, you have to have some kind of idea or purpose. Otherwise it's just meandering conversations in your ear. And like, sometimes you don't want, you want more than that.
So have a passion for something and something you can talk about a lot.
Mm-hmm. So Sarah, when you were thinking about starting this podcast with Michael Payne, who is our CIO, the company leader at PaynePoints, what was sort of the thought process there? Because our podcast is about small businesses and it's kind of evolved. And we can even, after you answer that question, Shannon and Angélica, I pass the question on to you both. How would you say that your podcast has evolved since you started it? Sarah, you go.
So, well, in the beginning, Mike, I think just really wanted to, and I too, wanted to utilize a medium that wasn't really being utilized for something like that. He has this software development company and he wants to bring it into media. And he was like, well, what the best way to do that is to actually produce media of some kind. And a podcast was an easy way to do that. And at first we were answering business technical type questions, how do you file a DBA and things like that we had found on the internet that people were asking. And it was just like boring. Like it didn't have any soul. It didn't have any grit. Do you know what I mean? Like it was just, yeah. And so after a while of doing that, not really seeing it generate the response we were hoping for, I said, we've got to retool. We've got to think about doing something different. And I said, you know, one of the things he has a passion for is helping other small businesses. And, you know, with questions of technical things or software or things that can help their business in some way. And I was like, well, why don't we take that idea? And I grew up, in my early adult life, I loved watching James Lipton inside the actor studio and his interview style. And I thought, why don't we just sit down with business owners, small business owners, not, you know, corporations and things like that, and talk to the real people who kind of uphold the backbone of the economy here in this country, and find out how they got started. And when we were sitting around kind of brainstorming ideas about that, the idea came up, you need a co-host and it needs to be another female, and Kristin is the one to do it. Actually, Ben and Mike were the ones that were like, Kristin's got to do it with you, because we were friends too. We haven't been friends since junior high, but we've been friends for a few years, and we're really good at talking back and forth with each other over different things. And you know, Kristin's just
never they have a loss of anything to say.
Yeah, it's just all the time. So she's like, you guys want to be perfect, sitting down with these people and you know, asking them questions. And so we kind of built a template, you know, of these are the highlights we want to hit with each guest, but we're going to let the conversation happen organically. So we may not get to these questions, but they're there in case, you know, some guests we have on or you know, they get panicked and they're like, I don't know what to say. And so you kind of have to help them along. Like, well, here's a question to answer. So it's evolved over time. And I really feel like there's a lot more heart in it. People get to sit down and they get to talk about themselves and tell their story and kind of highlight their business in a slightly different way. I mean, we can all post on Facebook and take out ads and put things on Instagram, but having a podcast where you tell your story, they'll share it on their social media and, you know, get their customers and, you know, involved and get them excited. And, oh, I didn't know you did this. That's really cool. So, you know, it's one of those things that you know, you said something about having a passion for it. I'm a storyteller, you know, and I want to tell their story with them. And that's kind of, we went from answering really boring technical questions to, you know, a much more emotional connection with people and letting them, you know, giving them a platform to tell their story. So
I feel like the way we do it now is a really a way for people to, I don't know, kind of commiserate, because when you're running your own business, a lot of times you run into similar, you know, everybody runs into a similar issue, and to have that, to be able to be like, I'm not the only one, you know, and it's an encouragement. It's a way to lift people up, you know, who are struggling, you know, through, and then also a resource for people who are struggling to be like, okay, they did this, maybe I'll try that too. Maybe it'll work, you know, so.
For sure. Shannon and Angélica, how would you say your podcast has evolved?
Oh man. I mean, it's evolved in a lot of ways, but I think originally, like I said, I had that sort of layout of like 10 episodes where we were trying to, the tagline of our podcast is the essential guide for recent converts and seasoned fans alike. So I think the initial point was to just to make maybe a short thing, like here are 10 episodes for like somebody that just wants to get a basic gist of Kpop. Because when we do have those fortunate times of somebody asking us about it, it's so nuanced and it's so different from like Western entertainment that you get tripped up on like, wait, I have to explain this part though. So we had to get out all of that initial explaining at first. And then it was like, okay, what do we do? So that's when we had to start getting really niche, and we do like deep dives into a single group or a single person or a single year. And we go into just like very little minutia things. But I think one of the biggest evolutions is the way that we've been able to involve our listeners in the show. Because like at first we just had a Twitter and an Instagram and an email, you know, your standard things that you set up. But like over time, we have this Discord that's just full of wonderful people talking all the time. We have like a voicemail so we can play people's voices on the show. And that's really like contributed to just having different voices besides our own, because even though we try to be very unbiased and share information, like we have things that we love and things that we know nothing about. And our listeners have been very helpful in just bringing in more K-pop voices into the show. Yeah,
Excellent.
the community that we've been able to build has really helped. And it kind of saved the show at a certain point too, because we did go into it with this very specific plan for each episode. And we still do a lot of planning, but we had reached a point where we had sort of covered everything. And when we were kind of evaluating like, well, this is really fun, like we do want to keep doing it, and there's still so much about K-pop that we could talk about, like how could we sort of branch out and change or add to the topics and the scope of our show. And being able to have conversations with listeners was really helpful, because then they were able to like suggest episodes for us, or give us, I don't know, they just like inspired us in a lot of different ways. And so that was essential.
Great.
You guys were talking about, Shannon, you said that you created like a 10 episode sort of outline. So when you were getting started, you sound like me, prepare, make a list, get everything going and ready. But let's talk about the technical sides of starting a podcast, because there's some equipment that you have to invest in and some software. So tell us, both of you, in your own words, what y'all had to use and start with to get going on all this.
Okay, this is my most uncomfortable podcast question. This is my small loan of $1 million from my father question. I work at a podcast network. I was able to use the studio. I can't anymore because of COVID, and like we might not ever be able to again. So I can talk about what we bought when we went home, but like full disclosure,
Perfect.
I had studio access for the first 2 years. So
Hey, if you have it, you should use it.
So I just have to be honest about that. But
That's fine.
when we went home for COVID and had to start, how are we going to do the show now? We just picked up these Samson, I think they're cute, 60 podcasting mics. I think they cost, or maybe I'm thinking of the 60.
No, it's the Samson Q2 microphone that costs $60.
It costs $60. I knew there was a 60 in there somewhere. But it works. I think it works just fine. It does USB or it does aux. So if you use like what's that word I'm looking for?
Some kind of box, sound box.
Yes. I have a sound box that we use, and that's what we have in our studio.
This is how technically inept I am. My husband is a musician and a composer, and like he has all the stuff. So that's my other like crutch that I have. But yeah, this mic is great, and we just record in QuickTime. It comes with most computers, and if you're just recording your own thing, I think it works perfectly. Another great thing we do for guests, that is a podcast tip, if you're having guests on and they don't have a microphone, just an iPhone on a book in front of your face with the voice memo on sounds amazing. Amazing.
Oh, okay.
Good to know.
So that's a pro tip, recording at home pro tip. If people don't have mics, the cell phones truly do an okay job.
You just have to keep it steady and near your mouth. So like a stack of books is key.
Good to know. This is good. This is helpful for us, for call-in guests that don't have fancy equipment.
Sure. Yeah.
So if I can go now, Sarah.
Yes,
Sure.
please, Megan, you tell everybody what our setup is, because we unfortunately can't hook up our fancy mics to our computers yet.
Not yet. That's something I'm doing some research on. I just recently got promoted to like the actual producer status. I've had that name for like months, but like I'm only just now like the real producer. So anyway, like when I came onto the podcast, Michael had already bought a bunch of microphones. He had bought some fancy equipment that later when I came on, we ended up not using. Like literally right now, I just use GarageBand on my Mac. And that works. When I was looking for microphones, and this is something that I found really useful when I was kind of revamping our equipment situation, I looked up, one of the podcasts that I listened to is called the Jenna Julian podcast, before they stopped doing it. And I just looked up what kind of podcast microphone do they have? And then I found like a duplicate for it because their microphones were like $400 a piece. That wasn't in the budget. So I found comparison videos, comparing here's this mic versus this mic, here's the price discrepancy. And, I couldn't tell a difference. So you don't have to spend top dollar to have good quality audio, for sure. And you definitely don't have to buy like crazy fancy equipment or software for the editing process either. Like I said, I currently just use GarageBand. And our headphones are like $30 headphones from Amazon that we use.
Thank God for Amazon.
Yeah, within the software thing too, I feel like we also just use GarageBand, and I feel like all you need is a couple of like denoising plugins, just to get rid of like air conditioner buzzes and stuff, which are usually really cheap. And I just want to shout out another audio product that I've found really helpful since we've been home, because I used to have an aux cord that went into the why can't I think of what that sound box is called? This is driving me crazy. Anyway, there was an aux cord so that I could play clips and they would record onto the thing. And I don't have that aux cord anymore. So I got a little software called Piezo, Piezo, and it allows you to just record whatever is playing on Chrome, and it saves it as a separate audio track. Sorry, I can't talk.
It's Monday.
And it's really, it's been really, really helpful to me. And I feel like I think the license was like $25 forever. So recommend that if you are a podcast that uses audio clips and don't know how to rip them easily. That's a good way to do it.
Yeah.
Good
Perfect.
deal. So we, it's relatively easy to record a podcast. You don't necessarily have to have fancy equipment. Like you guys said, you can use your phone, you can use programs that are already on your computer. Some people don't realize though that there is like a platform that you typically have to upload your podcast to in order to get it out there to the world. Do you guys care to share which platform you guys use to post your podcast?
Sure. When we started, I used the Libsyn free tier, and realized very quickly that the size limits were not going to work because our show is quite long. It's usually an hour and a half. So I needed more space. And then I also just wanted more features. I wanted more analytics. I want to be I want to dig in, look at who's listening. So I actually signed us up with an app called Pippa that has since been eaten by Acast. So I'm technically we're Acast. And I think I'm on like the premium tier. It's kind of expensive, but they auto upload my episodes to YouTube when I publish them. It like makes a video and publishes it to my YouTube channel, which like for me is worth it because I would not have time to do that. So yeah, we're an Acast family, but like Anchor is free. Like there's a lot of free ones. I just wanted bits and bobs and analytics and stuff, so I pay for it.
We use Transistor, I think, and it's kind of expensive as well because it auto posts to YouTube, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, the podcast app, all the
several different.
I can't even list them all because I can't remember them all.
All the catchers.
It uploads to all of them at the same time, and it does cost money. But like you said, there are free ones. And two, if you want all the analytics and the things where you can kind of research who's listening to which episode, where are they from, and all the things, if you want to monetize it, that is helpful. Whereas with the free ones, you don't get some of those features, and you are limited on time length and how many people can listen to your podcast. That's another thing. You want to, if you take off and you become super popular and it becomes viral in a sense, some places limit how many people can listen to your podcast. So it's a thing to keep in mind, when you're thinking about doing this. Start off free, and as you grow, you can pay for more expensive stuff, I guess. Mm-hmm. So what were you going to say, Megan?
I was just going to say, Anchor is free. I don't know much about it, but there's also options like you can just post your podcast on YouTube or SoundCloud, which are also free platforms. I think a lot of people get intimidated by starting a podcast because they think it's something they have to invest a lot of money into. And if you're just looking to get started and see if it works for you, then just use your phone microphone in kind of a sound secluded room. Just post it to SoundCloud or YouTube. If it's just for a hobby and you don't have the time or the money to super invest in it, your podcast is just as valid if it's on the free places. So I encourage anybody and everybody to start a podcast, because I think everybody's voices should be heard.
Do you ladies have a particular format? Like, is every episode themed? Do you have a certain things that you hit each episode? How does that work? So give us a rundown and description of how your episodes break down.
Angélica, you should talk.
Okay. Yeah, we have a general structure that we tend to follow. We have a very specific topic for each episode. So for example, like, because our purpose was to be a guide, our show is educational. It is fun, but it is also like primarily meant to be educational. So we do a lot of research. So for example, we'll do we'll talk about K-pop news and where to find it, right? Because we are international fans. So we know that we have this this topic of, okay, well, if you do want to stay up to date with K-pop, where could you go? So then we'll do the research to find the different sources, and then we'll just sort of like run down, whatever, all the information. And so our general structure will have our same intro every time, like word for word, the intro is the same. I think even the intonation that like we say our names is the same.
I think that's an extremely important part of podcasting to me, specifically as a longtime listener. I want to be able to mouth along to the intro, and it needs to sound exactly like it did last week.
I do that every week.
Great.
So we always start with our same intro, and then we sort of introduce the topic and we just dive right in. And we typically like go back and forth. We like sharing whatever. We don't really plan out who's going to say what, but we've usually split up the research ahead of time because we have a shared Google Doc where we keep all of our stuff. And so we'll just sort of like, this is sort of weird to say, but like, if you're going to have a co-host, you have to make sure that you have good chemistry, because Shannon and I, like, without speaking or agreeing upon it ahead of time, can just pick up a rhythm and go back and forth and cover all the information.
It's that psychic best friend stuff that's hard to come by.
So that's really helpful if you have a psychic best friend. They're a great co-host. But so and then we always end our show the same way as well. So after we've covered whatever that specific topic is, we say, and we'll be right back for a random game. And then there's a little soundbite that comes, and then we play this game. So it's like a specific segment that whatever we're listening to or learning about might be different, but the process of the game is the same. So we play the game, and then we end with a recommendation of something to like something that we've been listening to. And those have been getting a little longer lately. They used to be real short.
Some
and
episodes
sweet.
They really the recommendation really takes off.
It's like we'll start to 30 minutes.
And I think sometimes people might start to check out when I say like, oh, time for weekly recommendations. And if they do, they might be missing 20 minutes of content, because sometimes we're not done.
Yeah, sometimes, it'll just like remind us of something and then we go off. But anyway, so we do have, and then the closing statement is always the same. Like the way that we say goodbye is the same. And then we have like an ending tagline as well. So the sort of general structure is always the same.
Kristin, why don't you tell everybody what our format is like?
It's very similar. We have the same intro every time, hence me saying good morning when we started, because that's what I'm used to saying. Yes. And then we just sort of, like Sarah said earlier, we have like this list of questions, and we may or may not hit those questions. Like sometimes it just gets very organic and we end up going off on a tangent, and it just is what it is, but we always have that list of questions to fall back on if we like hit a stale spot or, whatever. We're working on our like psychic best friend thing.
She does really good. She'll ask all these really great questions that I was like just coming to the point where it's like, oh, we should probably ask that. And then she just jumps right in and asks it. And I was like, taken care of. It's great.
We've been great. We've been really close friends for like 3 years now, but not since junior high. So we don't quite have the psychic thing worked out just yet, but we're getting there.
Almost. We're almost there. Yeah, go ahead. Sorry.
That's pretty much, that's what we do. And it's for me at least, it's the most fun episodes are when we really just get into like a conversation, and it's just like sitting down around, with coffee with somebody you've just met, and you're just talking, and those are the ones where it's a good back and forth, and we totally lose the questions. Like we just go off on random subjects, and it's all kind of in the same vein, but those are the most fun. Because you end up learning a lot more, and I think our podcast a lot of times is about, it's educational, I mean, y'all's is too, right? So,
Yes.
so, sometimes it's fun to go off on a tangent and learn something new. So, yeah.
Well, and learning about an industry that I wouldn't have been as familiar with, and then hearing that person talk and go, oh, I didn't even know that was a thing. Wow, that's cool, So I really enjoy that aspect of it. Do you guys ever interview guests? Do you take questions from the internet that people specifically submit to you guys? Because it says, ask me about Kpop. So I was curious how that works.
Yeah, I feel like we got way more direct questions in the beginning. And those we were, like Angélica said earlier, like we're able to build episodes around those sometimes. Like somebody will just ask an innocuous question and it will be like, oh my God, that is actually the tip of the biggest iceberg. This will be a whole episode. So that stuff is wonderful. Guest episodes, we haven't done a ton. They're usually not like the only interview question we ever ask is we ask all of our guests to tell their K-pop origin story, which is how they discovered K-pop and got into it. But most of the time we've had a guest, it's like been usually around a topic. Like we had somebody come in and he like doesn't like K-pop, but he loves variety shows. So like we had him on, but we were just like talking about different variety shows. I don't feel personally like I'm a great interviewer. It freaks me out. I feel like I always panic when it's time to ask questions because I don't have the same rapport with a guest as I do with Angélica. So yeah, usually the show is just us though.
It is usually just us. Yeah. And like Shannon said, we have guests on for a specific topic, and they are usually there. Like we're not necessarily asking them about themselves. We are getting them to just be a part of the conversation that we would have probably been able to have without them. So it's less of like a direct interview and more of just like an open sort of discussion, but we do guide it. I have a background in journalism, so it doesn't make me nervous to interview someone, but our guest appearances are not usually like a direct interview. Like one of our guests is like a friend who came to a concert with us, and then it was like, oh, this is your first K-pop concert. Like, how was it? And that's kind of the only question we ask. So ours is a more sort of loose structure when it comes to guests.
Yeah. Yeah. Go ahead, Megan. Sorry.
Okay. I was just going to say, there are no like ask me about K-pop interviews yet until y'all start interviewing idols.
Eric Nam has to be first though. So he needs to get it together and then we will get it done.
Yeah. We've got quite a lot to say to that one.
I've done that whole interview in my mind so many times. So like, I think I'll be ready for that one.
We're ready.
Excellent. Well, Sarah, what were you going to say?
I was going to say, I also have a background in journalism, so asking people questions is, and I was a professional photographer for like 20 years. So, telling stories through picture taking or just sitting and interviewing somebody, that it wasn't that big of a deal. I mean, there was that panic of, I'm about to sit down and record my voice, which is a question I'm about to ask you guys, kind of for everybody. I'm going to throw it out there. What have you learned about yourself since you've started this podcast? And for me, it is, I can disassociate when re-listening to the podcast and go, that's somebody else talking. Because you know how it is when you hear the sound of your own voice, you're just like, that's how I sound, And so I've had to, for the last year that we've done them, I've had to re-listen to them and take quotes and create a social media campaign. And so I'm having to re-listen to every episode, and I'm listening to me talk, and I had to like come to a place of security with myself, that, everybody else has heard me talk like that forever, and I'm hearing myself this way. So, it's not that bad. Like I had to come down off this ledge of criticism about the way I sounded or what have you on a recorded track. So that's one of the things that I had to learn about myself is in doing this podcast and then putting it out there for the world to listen to and to be secure enough in listening to my voice be broadcast out there. So Megan, what about you?
I think I've learned in a similar way to not take criticism so harshly. Because criticism, it can be a bad thing, obviously, if somebody's just like ragging into you and it's not constructive. But, I think in the beginning when I was given criticism, I would take it to heart. I would take it very personally. But something that I've learned is that nothing is personal. So if Michael came to me and said, hey, we need to change this to make it sound better, over time, I would get a lot better at recognizing, okay, we both want the podcast to sound great. We both want it to run as smoothly as possible. He's not attacking me. He's just trying to help. So weirdly, like learning how to deal with criticism and not taking everything as a rejection has been a part of my journey in podcasting.
Kristin, what about you?
I don't really know how to answer that question. I told Sarah when we were getting ready for this, was like, I don't think I'm really qualified to be part of this interview or this podcast, because like I just show up and talk and then leave. Like I have an excuse to spend an hour away from my children and get to hang out with Sarah and Megan. Like that's what this is, my like weekly reprieve from the screaming children. They're gonna watch this one day and I'm like, Mom. But so I mean, it's for me, it's been a great outlet to get to be an adult and get to speak to other people that can speak back to me, to to get to learn and pick up tips and pointers and things to bring home for my own business, because we interview other small business owners and stuff. So for that, it's been a big motivator and inspiration to like get to work, so that's what I've really gotten from it is a little bit of adult time and get to hang out with my buds and then, bring home some ideas to use in my business. So, yeah.
Shannon, what about you?
Oh, you guys all had such really nice answers. My immediate thought was like, oh, I noticed all my weird vocal tics and how I like start sentences the same all the time. Like that's what I've learned, is that I repeat myself a lot. Yeah, no, I will unabashedly say that I was born to speak into microphones. It's my favorite thing to do. So
she's got a very radio quality voice to her.
Thank you.
She's very sultry.
Thank you. That's why I read all of the promos on my network. But yeah, no, so that part, listening to my own voice doesn't bother me. And I love our show. I listen to our show all the time. I think it's good. But what is it? I don't know what I've learned. I feel like I've learned that, like, I don't know that I can really stick to something. I think that's been a struggle for me my whole life. Is I love having projects, but I hate finishing things. I like to start stuff. And I remember when we were getting the first couple episodes together and I was like doing this insane amounts of research, and like, I didn't do that great in school. Like I wasn't ever very good at homework, but like I am good at homework for my podcast. And I thought I would get tired of that someday, but I really don't. Like when we do episodes that are about, like we recently did an episode about a specific style of Korean music called trot. And I had to do research like in another language and learn about music from the 50s. And I was just like high on nerdy information and like, just like the way that I've been able to like maintain the same like passion for this is kind of amazing to me. Because I don't know, I thought we would have gotten tired of it by now.
So you learned that you have commitment. Yeah, that's
I
cool.
do. I am capable of commitment.
Okay, and Angélica, what about you? What has this podcasting thing taught you?
Well, my first answer was similar to Shannon's in that I already knew I was someone who processes by thinking out loud. I already knew that, but then in listening to the show, I realized that, I mean, when you record it, what ends up happening is that I just repeat what Shannon said a lot of times. Like Shannon will explain or introduce this thing, and I, in my attempt to process it, will just rephrase it and then move on. And so every once in a while, I'll hear myself do it on the show, and I'm like, why did you say that? Like, we'd already covered this. So I learned that I repeat Shannon a lot. And at the beginning, which I still do, I also interrupted her all the time. I still do it sometimes, but I try to do it less now. But I was kind of like you were saying earlier, where like you just show up and talk. That's kind of been my like running joke about my like participation in the show, is that like, oh, I just show up and like laugh into the microphone, because Shannon does all the technical work, as you could maybe notice by my like distinct absence in all of those questions. Like you guys are speaking a whole other language. I don't know what Pippa is. I don't know none of that stuff.
I've never heard of any of that stuff that they're talking about at that point. So I got you. I feel you there.
Thank you. So yeah, I didn't like have a problem, you know, getting myself in or hearing myself recorded, but it was more of like, I learned what it was like, maybe like my annoying habits as a conversationalist. Hopefully I've abetted some of those, but I don't know. We're all a work in progress.
Yes,
I guess
definitely.
I guess I need to go and actually listen to some of the podcasts that I have been on, because I haven't. I'm afraid that I'm going to be too critical, and the next time we go to record one, I'm going to be like, I'm going to freeze up and get all nervous because I'm going to be too analytical and critical of myself. So I listen to the ones that guest hosts were on, but none of the ones that I've been on.
Oh, I love listening to our show. I listen to our show all the time.
It's so fun. It's just like living. We've been doing it so long now too that it's just like reliving beautiful memories.
Yeah. Although sometimes we've been doing it for so long that like if I listen to an old episode and I say something that's like, you know, my opinion of that artist has like totally changed, or like I comment on something that I didn't know anything about that now I'm like obsessed with, and I almost get like embarrassed. I'm just like, oh my God, you stupid, like you didn't no idea what's coming for you.
Yeah, I think we all have those little things, you know. Yeah. I'm kind of jumping around here with this question, but it just popped into my head. It had absolutely nothing to do with anybody's answer. But, you know, in talking about having a podcast and putting it out there for the world to hear, how did you guys start promoting your podcast? So like, was there a particular platform that you used more than others? Did you start the Discord server when you started the, you know, podcast, and that's how you gain followers? Like what, because that's going to be a thing people are going to want to know. Like, okay, I know the technical ends now, and now I know I've got a passion I want to talk about. What do I do to get it out there and get people interested in it? So tell us what you guys did for that.
Yeah, we started just an Instagram and a Twitter account. I squatted on the handles when I decided to do the podcast. That's another pro tip. Is if you're getting started, get all your ducks in a row and make sure nobody else has that podcast name. It'll ruin your SEO if it's already being used. So I just sort of posted episode links when episodes would come out, like, hey, new episode. On Instagram, I started a tradition of doing like a collage of pictures of things that we talked about. And then on Twitter, I do a link, and usually a relevant GIF is kind of the format that I stick to. I feel like in the beginning, I followed a lot of other K-pop podcasts and just tried to get like inundated with them and get their listeners over. And there was another podcast called the Kpop Cast that at the time was doing these like Twitter chats on Tuesdays where they would be like, what's your favorite thing that came out this week? And so I would always participate in those with the podcast account and like follow everybody who was like participating in those, just to try to get like some eyes on our page or whatever. But I think it's just sort of really grown very organically. I've never spent money on any paid promo. Oh, that's not true. There is one thing that we did. I totally forgot about it because February was another universe ago. But at the beginning of the year, this behind me is our logo, and it's a button, and we have actual physical buttons. and stickers as well. And so I had business cards printed up that had a little blank for the button and the name of our show, the logos of all the places you could find us, like all the app logos, all of our social medias, whatever. One night we sat and hole punched them and just tacked buttons onto like a couple hundred cards. And then when we went to concerts for 17 and Super M, we just handed them out to people, and we met a listener in line.
I got a couple of those.
Because we met a listener in line who was on her way to Texas for more shows, and we were like, take a box of cards. And she did.
And she met Megan.
Yeah.
It was so crazy. It was the
small
weirdest
world.
thing.
So that's the only... Oh, go ahead.
I was just going to say, that's a really great idea when you have that kind of a podcast where you're talking about, musical artists, and you go to a concert and you hand out like your card with your button. And, I don't know how we're going to do that. And maybe at the next, COVID is a whole different world now, but
right.
like we can do it the next dinner at like something after 5. There's a thing locally there where you can go, business people can mingle together. So maybe we'll do it then when you don't have to social distance anymore, if that's ever a thing we ever get to do again, but for the future, perhaps. That's great. Y'all took them to concerts. And Angélica, was there anything that did you like post on your personal social media or?
No, I'm not a big social media person in general. I'm like I have a social media, but I haven't used my Facebook in like a decade. Like I don't really use them very often. So, Shannon like markets podcasts as her job.
Again,
so it's
my job.
Literally her job. So, I really let all of the marketing like to her, and I've kind of only in the last year been sort of learning like how Twitter works. And so, sometimes I will help in like, tweeting something or like making whatever. Like I think I made all the Spotify playlists. But I don't really, I don't do a lot as when it comes to promoting. Like it's literally her job. So just let her do her thing. I brought the hole punches from my classroom so that could put the buttons on the cards.
She's being kind. She helps me so much. I don't want y'all to think she does nothing. But you also asked specifically about Discord. And I will say that the Discord had nothing to do with, I can't take any credit for the Discord, because last year we were approached by a like fandom app and were paid to do some content with them. And the app was kind of hard to use and the listeners didn't really like it. I didn't really like it. So people were like, what about Discord? And I was like, I don't want to try it. I was like afraid to try, like ask people to try another thing, but then we were all in quarantine and a listener was like, I'll start it though. You don't have to do anything. I'll start it. And I was like, okay, go ahead. And it's been amazing. I'm so grateful that they did it. But I think also for me, I've always had a weird hesitation same with starting our Patreon, which we could talk about separately if you wanted, but I'm afraid of, I think I guess they call it like imposter syndrome now or whatever, but like I'm afraid of starting a thing or asking people to like, hey, come do this thing. And then like only 5 people come. And don't I look like such a doofus? Like I'm just afraid of like creating things and then like nobody will come and I'll be embarrassed. So I think that's had been my hesitation in a lot of the things that we've started. It took me a while to like get on board.
Yeah, well, some of those things kind of take some time to build momentum too. So, when we first started the podcast over a year ago, it wasn't that great. And then we changed the format and it really jumped up, but it still wasn't what I would have liked to see. And so it's just gone steadily up ever since then. And building a following has been slow for us because of the nature of our particular podcast. Only business owners, I think, and people who just are generally curious about others are interested in it. So we do have a very narrow market, in terms of who listens to our podcast. But our thing is to like promote other people's businesses with our social media for that week. So if they've come on, and so right now, this week, the current week that we're in, a guy who owns a martial arts studio was our guest, and he came in and talked about his business starting that and how he had been basically a martial arts teacher since he was like 8 or 9 years old when he first started taking classes. And so we gear all of our social media around that particular guest and promote their business that week rather than promoting ourselves. So, kind of hopefully generating some good karma and goodwill out there and letting people, see, hey, look, this is what it looks like when you support people in your community. Or we interview people from all over the country, but, especially the local ones, I feel like they really appreciate that little extra, somebody else cares and is, wants to see my business succeed. So it's been slow, but I'm real happy to see the growth over the last 6-7 months. It's been nice, it's kind of like you. I have that fear of, what if nobody shows up? Like, what if no one listens? But that's kind of just, you got to put it out there and, if it's good enough, people will come and listen. So, yeah. What was the most challenging thing when you get started doing your podcast? What would you guys say was like the biggest hurdle you had to overcome? Was there one?
I don't know. Off the top of my head, I feel like our biggest challenge was when we felt like we were running out of, when we felt like we hit a creative wall. But that was a good 9 months into
9 or 10 months in.
Yeah, it was almost a year into doing the show that we felt like we were sort of at a loss. But I can't really think of anything else. I am going to turn a light on because the sun has set and it's getting real dark in here, but I'm here. I'll be right back.
You're fine. It's pitch black here and has been for a while. So that's why we all have lights in our faces.
Yeah, I'm trying to think of, I feel like the biggest challenge was just at the very beginning, like I said, getting all the ducks in a row to start it, finding out where you're going to host it and how you're going to do it. And it's called this, and I made the cover art and I got a Twitter account. In the beginning, I feel like that was the biggest hurdle because again, we were lucky in that the premise of our podcast was had been unbeknownst to us brewing in our souls for years and was just waiting to come out. So getting the episodes together at the beginning was not hard at all because it was just coming out of us. But yeah, like Angélica said, in the November of the first year, we took a whole month off. Like we said, we announced we're taking a hiatus, and we had several brainstorm sessions with the whiteboard of what can we do? And that's when we came up with segments and themed episodes that we still do today that have kind of revived and evolved our show. We do parlor game episodes. We watch movies together. Those kinds of things were born out of that initial crunch hiatus of what are we going to do now?
Yeah, but sometimes those challenges, like you said, lead to these really great ideas that you can implement, into what you've already currently doing. Megan, Kristin, do you guys have a perspective on what felt challenging to you guys when we first got going with this new format?
Kristin, you go first.
I'm trying to think of something to say.
Yeah, put her on the spot, Megan. Stop doing that.
Challenging. I don't know. I don't know. Like I said, I don't really do anything but show up and talk and leave. So for me, it's just the only challenging thing was getting over that initial is this going to be okay? Am I going to be good at this? Is this going to be okay? And you guys have always been yeah, you're great. So I'm okay, good.
She's the natural. She really is. She's totally downplaying. She's kind of like Angélica acting like she didn't do anything. Whatever. Anyway, Megan.
So I will admit that I spent a lot of nights crying about the podcast because I'm somewhat of a perfectionist. And so if something wasn't working out or if I couldn't figure something out and I was just having a lot of trouble with it, I would literally just sit at my desk and cry. And then I would have a good cry about it, and I would drink a glass of water, and I would, with a clear head, go and talk to somebody else and be like, this is the problem I'm having, and I really can't overcome this by myself. Can I talk? For example, my dad, I would be up here sometimes 9, 10 o'clock, even 11 o'clock at night, just sitting outside on the curb, talking about the problem that I was having, whether it be through editing, through literally any part of the process. Was just overcoming it's okay to be stuck. It's okay to have problems and issues. And that was my challenge, was being okay with things not being perfect, because like right now it's like totally making me anxious that the sound quality of this is not going to be perfect, but I've had to overcome that in a way and just go like, it's okay, like people are still going to listen to it, like your life isn't going to end because it's not exactly the way you wanted it to be.
I think because we live in COVID times and everybody's had to do things from home, the quality even of national broadcasts is not like top tier HD quality anymore. So I feel like we can all forgive ourselves just a little bit for things not being perfect. You know what I mean? Do you guys agree?
No, for sure. I was going to say that I feel like I felt similarly in the beginning about editing our show, because I didn't do the editing of the first like 50 episodes. I made my husband do it, and then that was just like, I need to learn how to do this myself. But I would get very upset where I'd be like, I need you to take this sentence out because I don't like how it sounded. But then if he clips it, like now the sentence structure is incomplete, and like I don't want to go record pickups and like, ooh. And over time, I've just gotten like less. I just sort of don't care about those things. And like, we stumble over our words sometimes. It's charming. It's fine. I don't need to cut it out. Like, I've just learned to like, let that kind of stuff go.
Isn't that why people like listen to podcasts? Is that it's not some overly produced, perfect production? You
would be surprised. I think that is the biggest divide in the industry. Like,
I think so.
I really do. And I'm trying to, what can I say without breaking my contract and like getting in trouble for talking about insider secrets? But I think there is like a real divide between people who like their podcasts to feel like a loosey-goosey conversation that, you know, that again creates that intimacy that you really like. And then there's other people who are very, very into making incredibly highly produced storytelling pieces where there are no breaths, there are no pauses, every line is scripted. Like that is half of podcasting. So a bunch of people that I work with, that's what they do all day. And the other people I work with just literally improvise for an hour and a half and do not edit it at all. And so like that's kind of the world.
It probably also has something to do with like the brand who is producing that particular podcast. So some brands want a very polished, very high quality sort of finished product, and then there are those of us who were just like, yeah, whatever.
I keep trying to get Megan to make a blooper reel or like a sound bite with like the dogs barking and the train going by and the baby crying in the background. Like these are all things that happen.
And the squeaky door for the podcast room is always like, at the worst moment ever.
Like just lean into it, make it part of it. Like it's just, you know, we're everyday average Joes like the rest of you. We don't know. Like somebody told me one time I was waiting tables and it was like I was about to have a panic attack. Like I was just in the weeds so bad. I was just freaking out. She looked at me and she said, "Sweetie, it's just dinner. It's not brain surgery. Nobody's gonna die. It's okay. It'll be all right. At the end of the day, it's gonna be okay." So, you know, it's not brain surgery. If they like it, they'll listen to it. If they don't, they won't. Okay.
Yeah. I think I want to build off of a point that Shannon made. There is a super big divide. Personally, I literally can't stand overly produced podcasts. There's something about the way it sounds in my ear that just bothers my Zoomer brain. But if that is your artistic style, like obviously the PaynePoints podcast and the Ask Me About Kpop podcast, they're very similar in that they are just friends talking. And while they do sound nice and they do have a structure and they are somewhat professional in a sense, if your form of storytelling is highly, highly produced, then do that. If that's your art form, like I implore you to do it. If your thing is just sitting around with friends drinking coffee, then do that. I think that there's a lot of different ways to do podcasts and there's no one right way.
Yeah, I was going to say something similar in that it I think has a lot to do with the subject of your podcast, because ours is educational, so we have a structure, but it is also built around the fact that we just like talking about K-pop. So and what we hear the most often from our listeners is that the appeal of our show is that it does sound like they're just talking with their friends about a subject that they like, because a lot of our listeners like don't know anybody else in real life that also listens to K-pop. So they don't have anybody to like scream about the new music video with or whatever. So they like that it is a very realistic conversation for us, because it like adds to the, you know, fandom of it all, I guess. Yeah, it adds to the experience. But like Megan was saying, I think it totally depends on what it is that you're doing with your show.
And I also think I honestly think that we kind of fall in a medium where like I don't care so much about word stumbling, like that. I've gotten over that stuff, but I am very, very anal about volume, and I mix music clips into our show, and I've really evolved the way that I do music clips. And when I listen to old episodes before I did it the way I do it now, I'm like, oh my God, how could I have done the music clips like this? So like I do feel like I edit our show a lot. But I don't want it to sound like I edited a lot. That's the like trick, is the happy medium of being like, I worked really, really hard on this, but it doesn't sound like I worked really, really hard on it.
Right.
Effortless.
For sure.
What would you ladies say is the most like rewarding or fun part of doing your podcast? And Angélica, I will start with you.
Oh, the listeners, of course, for sure. I know that that's like cheesy. You know, everybody's always like, oh, the fans couldn't have done it without you. But for real, like, I mean, we say this all the time, but the reason that we did the show was because we did want to expand our own personal like community of people that we knew who liked the same thing that we liked, and or at least cared to talk about it, whether they liked it or not. But everybody that like 99% of the people that we've ever interacted with because of this show has been so kind and so supportive, and just they've like, I think because like Shannon was saying, you know, podcasting can be such an intimate medium for people as they like listen to your voice in their ear throughout the day. People are, you know, very open with us, and they will really share a lot with us. And we have been able to make like actual friendships out of people who have reached out to us about, you know, certain things, whether it's just like, ooh, I really liked this band, or like you helped me through a really hard time, or I was having a hard day and you helped. Like we've been able to make so many real connections through this thing that like we don't even get to be there when you like it's not a live show or anything, but we still get to be a part of their lives in different ways, and that's been the best.
Shannon, what about you?
I fully wholeheartedly agree with that, and that would be my answer. But for the sake of having a different answer, I would say that I'm really grateful to the podcast for, again, like maintaining a passion for me, because I know that if we were not doing this show, that there's a ton of K-pop groups that I'm very invested in now that I wouldn't have been. And my favorite group for the last 2 years has been in the military and has been inactive. And like, if I didn't have this podcast, I might have just kind of slipped away from K-pop. Like there's a chance that like, I don't know, my fandom would be different. And the show is like not only like maintained it, but like expanded it so much. And it's given me like amazing opportunities and like great friends. And like, I love that like our biggest dream is to just be like recognized as like K-pop scholars who've like put in a lot of work into like maintaining the history of the genre. So whenever we get asked by magazines or college professors or whatever to like talk about the show or explain K-pop, a friend of mine, Dave Holmes, just got to interview BTS, and like we had many meetings before that so that I could help him through that. And I like love being able to be that person. So I'm also very grateful for that my podcast has given me an opportunity to just like keep talking about K-pop in more and more legit ways. Like I was on MTV yesterday. I keep forgetting that. Like,
I didn't
so
know
that kind of stuff is great.
MTV's still a thing. Wow. That's
It
great.
is.
Sure is.
Wow, that's awesome. Hey, Kristin, what about you? What would you say is a rewarding part of being a part of a podcast, or, you know, what's the most fun thing that you experience when we do this?
I think I kind of touched on that before, just getting to have something other than just small children in my life, get to like, you know, hang out with you guys, get to meet new people and like gain inspiration for my business. And it's really, it's real easy to get lost in being a mom, and this has helped me maintain being Kristin.
Yeah.
So it's very rewarding. I very much appreciate that.
Yeah, I'm glad we could help.
Yeah,
Megan, what about you?
Bringing value to people's lives has been the most rewarding thing about being the producer for the PaynePoints podcast, because there have been so many people who I've emailed and I've said, would you like to be a part of our podcast? And maybe they don't respond for whatever reason. But for the people who do, there have been some people who have said in response, like, you want to interview me? Like, I'm nobody. And I touched on this in another interview that we did, but it's the fact that I can make somebody feel important somehow. And that brings a lot of value to my life. And I think it brings a lot of value to other people's lives to be able to reach out and say, hey, you're a big deal in your own way. You are a superhero for owning your own small business. That's an incredible thing. We want to interview you. And I think that has brought importance and made people feel special and seen. That has definitely been the most rewarding thing, is improving and bringing joy and value to other people's lives.
I'd say for me that, as a small business owner over the years and having, either started or helped run other small businesses, I know how hard it is and I know the struggles. And so to be able to go to somebody and say, hey, you have a really interesting business, and would you mind coming on and telling your story with us? And like Megan was saying, the shock almost all of them have of, I'm nobody special. I'm not important. Like, my business doesn't make multi-million dollars, or whatever. It doesn't employ that many people, but it's a vital part of the community in some way. So I like that we talk to real people who own real businesses and not, millionaires who have corporations, because yes, we've all read, the Forbes articles about, the different people who own, all the name brand things I could list right now. But what about the people in your own community who have worked really hard to establish a business and their family has run it for 30 years and, things like that we don't, we talk about it. Small businesses and support your local and everything, but like really letting those people shine and getting to tell their story. It's been, I love listening to the passion a lot of them have for their job. They sit down and just, they're super nervous, and then they get into the interview and it's like, by the end of it, they're like, oh, I could do that again, and that's great. I like being able to get people to come out of that. Hey, I'm just sitting down with two ladies having a conversation, and it's great. And so that to me is the best part of it. All the technical things and all the judgment I have for myself, or the criticism of why did I say that, or why did I ask it that way? It's all gets overshadowed by, when they leave, or when they're leaving the podcast after we've recorded it, like, wow, that was such a great experience. Thank you so much. I really appreciate it. And then promoting it on their own social media later on. Hey, I was on this podcast. It was super cool. So that's fun. I like that. Well, ladies, we've been talking a while. I want to wrap up what we've been talking about tonight. And I want to say if you guys have any general tips for people who are wanting to start a podcast, anything you haven't already mentioned, little tips and tricks that are like, oh, hey, this is a thing. If somebody's starting a podcast, what advice would you give them outside of what we've already discussed that would really just, seal the deal? So Shannon, what would you say?
I think that having a plan is important, or even before you start a plan, just consider what your intentions are. So if you're trying to start a podcast that's going to be a weekly podcast, then you should have at least a couple of episodes planned out. I also recommend setting a schedule for yourself, recording on the same day or at the same time during the week is very helpful. I think it's also very important to put your show out on the same day, because people, again, with the intimate medium, a lot of people consider podcasts as part of their schedules. So if your show comes out on Wednesday, people will be expecting it on Wednesday. And I think that also helps in building a steady following, is if you come out consistently, even if it's once a month, if you're always putting something out, then you don't fall to the bottom of the subscription page. People don't forget about you. So again, if you have a plan, then you can, keep rolling it out on like a nice schedule. Or if your intention is to just do like a 10 episode thing and tell a story, like outline that out for yourself and see how long it's going to take or whatever, and how you're going to release, and just sort of like have a plan. If you want to create a podcast that then like, I don't know, if your intention is to have enough following to do a Patreon, to get picked up by a network, to those kinds of things, then yeah, consistency is key. Planning is key. Know what you want your podcast to be. Is it going to have segments? Are we just going to talk? I think segments are great because, again, my personal podcast style is like, I like the routine. I like the intro to sound the same, like whatever. So if you have like a segment, like figure that out early and do it every episode so that people have something, to cling to.
I think that's a great point that we hadn't actually talked about, is consistency. That's fantastic, because yeah, that's going to be important. If you want your listenership to grow, it has to be consistent. So, and Angélica, do you have anything to add or build on with that statement?
When we talked about this earlier, we got the chance to go to a class and talk about our podcast, and we talked about how like the more work you do before you record, the less work you have to do after you record. So when it comes to like if you're worried about editing and if you're not that technical or computer savvy, like you don't know how to really use GarageBand, the more prep you do once you hit record, the less like mistakes you might make or whatever, the less editing you have to do afterward, the less like things you have to do in post. And just as a general rule of thumb, but as a like sort of a more like personal piece of advice, I would say on that same note, like remember that it's not a live show. And so if you do make a mistake, like just take a breath, start over, start the sentence again. Like you can hit pause or like you can edit that out later. I think that Shannon and I often like forget that I still
forget this.
Yeah. Like we always try to just do it in one take. And every once in a while we'll just be like, okay, wait, take that out. Starting again. But we have to like say it out loud, like take that out. So that when we're listening through again, we can make sure that it's out there. But yeah, prep ahead of time and remember that it's not live. So mistakes are allowed.
Yes, definitely. We've had to do a take 2 and 3.
Yeah.
It's Monday morning when we record usually, and I'm not always fully awake and my coffee hasn't kicked in, and words are hard and I have trip over them quite frequently, and I'm like, okay, Megan, we got to start over.
But it does kind of tie back into like the nature of your show, because sometimes we'll leave those little bloopers in because it sort of adds to like the charm of it being off the cuff or something. Yeah. So it just depends on the show that you're making.
Yeah, definitely.
For sure.
Kristin, do you have any tips or advice, or on a personal level, just, hey, if you're going to be someone's sidekick on a podcast, this is what you should do?
I mean, make sure you like the people you're working with, that helps. But I think Shannon addressed that earlier, make sure you've got good chemistry with the people that you're going to be working with, because otherwise nobody's going to want to listen to it. It's awkward and weird, which, that's going to happen sometimes. Yeah. Because every now and then, like Sarah said, words are hard. You trip over your words, or you forget the question, or you get a weird text message from somebody and you get distracted, and then, it happens. So, but yeah, chemistry and make sure you like your subject and you like who you're working with.
Megan?
Take it just the right amount of serious. It's not life or death if it goes poorly or if it is a little bit weird. It's all right. You have, like we've all said, it's not a live show. You have the chance to record it again. Don't take yourself so seriously and try to have fun with it. That should be the first thing, is have fun with it. Unless it's like, you're doing it for a class project and you're getting graded on it, like, which I'm sure that doesn't ever really happen. Try and have fun. That's my
Truly, it did happen. There's a USC class,
the class that we went to,
and the homework was that they had to make a podcast episode about K-pop. That's why we were guests.
That's why
we
we
the
came.
Experts.
That's great.
That is so funny. Okay. I've been corrected.
Well, I think you guys have all had great answers. I don't know that I have anything to add. Those would all be something I would say, and y'all said them first. So I don't know what else to tell y'all. Do some research, definitely. Preparation. You can't just like slap this together. It does take some work. It does take a little bit of researching how to do certain things, and just slapping it together. While you could do that, I feel like maybe you're not going to take it as seriously enough to be consistent. So if it's really something you're passionate about and you really want to see the longevity of it, you have to prepare ahead of time. So yeah, I think that's great.
And fortunately, I do think that, like I said, I've worked in the podcast industry for almost a decade. So I remember when it was a thing that nobody knew what it was at all. And it's still like half of people still don't know what it is. But it has exploded so much in the last couple of years that like a quick Google how to start a podcast, read 4 different people's articles and watch a YouTube video, and like the information is out there. It's like it's not a secret lost art. But yeah, find out what works for you. And like, it's so popular now. My husband was just telling me he was at Guitar Center, and in the microphone room, they had a whole shelf that was labeled podcasting setups, and they were like selling bundles of the interface. It's called an audio interface, the box.
Yes. I've also been trying to think about that the whole time.
An hour later, we figure out what the word is, y'all.
You know what? We got there eventually. That's
really
the key.
Matters.
Yeah, but the point is that they sell like podcasting bundles at the music store now, so you can just like get all your stuff in one go. And it's not quite the Wild West. So like the information is out there if you want to get started.
So that means that since it's so easy now-ish, anybody could get out there with their passion and whatever it is that they just want to really educate the world about and start a podcast on it. So hopefully this hour-long chat has helped some people, inspired them, and given them some tips on what to do next. Ladies, thanks so much for taking time out of your, I know, very busy schedules to jump on here and talk with us today. It was delightful to meet you both. Megan talks about y'all all the time, so it's nice to put faces with names. So thanks so much for doing that.
We really love Megan, so thank you for having us here.
Yes, Megan sent us the most wonderful professional email, and I messaged Shannon and I said, how do I respond? Yes, of course, professionally. And I didn't. I think I just said, anything for you, Megan.
And thank you so much. I mean, we didn't say it up top, but Shannon and Angélica are two of my heroes, and it really meant a lot to me that you guys would agree to come on my podcast 2 years after I started listening to yours. So thank you both. It's really been a pleasure.
This is what keeps us going, Megan. This kind of stuff. You know it.
Podcasts bring the world together. It's great. I love this. Well, ladies, thanks so much for joining us. Guys, I hope you guys enjoyed this. Oh, wait. Yes.
Mom, we need to ask them where we can find them.
Yes. Oh my goodness. See, I'm all off my routine today because we normally record in the morning, and I have a whole different list of questions, and I don't have all my notes here in front of me. See, I'm telling you, we're not always perfect. Okay, ladies, tell us where we can find you guys online.
We are at AMA Kpop Pod. That's 2 P's everywhere that you can be an at something. We also have a Patreon, patreon.com/AMA Kpop Pod. If you want to pay us a little bit of money, we do extra video content. But the show, it comes out for free every Wednesday and is available everywhere podcasts are found: Spotify, Stitcher, Apple Podcasts, whatever. We also have a YouTube channel. Yeah, I think that's all the podcast places. We have like 135 episodes plus some bonuses. We're about to get into year-end wrap-up. So if you want to hear like what was cool in K-pop in 2020, you can tune in right now. But if you heard this and were like, I want to hear about K-pop, start at episode 1 of our podcast, and I promise you will be like a full-blown expert within a couple of episodes.
Awesome. So anybody needing to know what K-pop is and you don't want to get old and you want to keep up with the culture, you should go do that. I have residents that live in my house that tell me all the time and keep me up to date on all the cool
I'm
things
sure
happening.
you're a secondary expert as well at this point.
Feels like it at this point, yeah. Well, ladies, thank you so much. Did I cover it all, Megan? Did I get it?
I think we did. I think we got it all. You can find us at www.PaynePoints.com for all of our social media. And we are found wherever podcasts are found. Please leave us a rating and a review on Apple Podcasts. Follow us on Spotify and give us a subscribe and a like on YouTube.
All right, ladies. Well, I think I'm going to let y'all all go back to your evening. Thanks so much for joining us. I hope everybody enjoyed this special episode. And this is going to air during the holidays. So Merry Christmas, Happy New Year, and any other holiday that you celebrate during that time. And we'll see you guys in the new year. Bye.
Bye.